Hey, great Thursday, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully, we're having a wonderful day out there. I've got an update here for you on this big time pattern change on the way, as well as some tropical mischief here ongoing still. Even though we're all the way almost halfway into November here, we're going to break all of it down for you in today's video. Now, we are, seeing some active weather out there right now as well, but I think things really go downhill at the start of this coming week. And then through much of next week and potentially even into the long range, staying active as a big cold air mass kind of moves over the east and almost parks itself there. And that will lead to the chance of multiple storm systems that could bring winter weather impacts through many different parts of the country. Now, obviously, we are also going to talk about the tropics, but luckily we have seen a good trend overnight for us in the United States. Now, that does not mean you can let your guard down yet. But we have seen signs pointing to maybe a weaker system, and we'll talk about why that is in today's video. Now, if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do so. Like the video, comment, let me know where you're watching from, and consider sharing it with somebody that is a big winter weather fan like myself. I think that they will probably enjoy a lot of what we talk about in this one. Alrighty, with that said, let's go ahead and get started here and kind of break down what we're seeing out there right now. So current satellite loop, you'll notice, again, active weather here into the tropics with what is soon to become Sarah. Really anytime today, likely going to hit that designation. So I'm going to go ahead and just call it Sarah now because it's going to get there eventually. And then we do have another low pressure that is crossing the country and bringing plenty of shower and even some ice activity here for some of us on this Thursday. And it's going to be a very raw, cold day for many of us as this works on through. And then out west, another storm system working through, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But let's go ahead and start with the tropics and kind of break that down for you. So again, this is what is very likely to become Tropical Storm Sarah, and if you are watching this later on today, then it very well already could be Tropical Storm Sarah, but you'll notice plenty of thunderstorm activity flaring up with this one, and even kind of has a look that is getting more organized, I guess is the best way to mention it. Now, obviously, it does not look like it is running for the door here towards hurricane status quite yet. And one main reason for that, and the reason that we've seen kind of some calmer solutions overnight with our models, is look at how close this is to Central America. I talked about in yesterday's video, worst case scenario was that this storm would kind of go up and move right between the Yucatan and Cuba. Well, all day long yesterday and overnight last night, all the models shifted to a solution that is much more like this. And you'll notice how much land interaction there is, not only with the Yucatan there, but even with Honduras and Nicaragua running into, some of that frictional force along the surface here as the storm kind of skirts across land. And again, there are some mountainous areas in here as well. So that is, causing problems for this center of circulation, which is good news for us, but unfortunately not such great news for South America, as they're going to pick up on even more rain. Or not South America, but Central America rather. They're going to pick up on even more rain than maybe originally expected. Now, latest coming from the National Hurricane Center, the storm is still expected to meander here over the near term in this area. So should it meander just offshore and kind of loop around here for a while, then yes, it'll have a higher chance to hit hurricane status. But should it, move into Honduras and then just kind of die out over here and then slowly work up over the Yucatan Peninsula, then, we're very likely to only see some rainfall impacts into the United States. So the track is still very important for the intensity of this storm. And again, the question is, does it go through Central America and kind of get killed off, or can it stay offshore, a good bit and have a higher chance of hitting, hurricane status? Either one is possible, but I think the most likely one right now is it kind of just skirts Honduras for a while and then moves up into the Yucatan. Now, the National Hurricane Center is still expecting a 65-mile-an-hour tropical storm here, kind of at max intensity, sometime as it, again, is skirting the northern coast of Honduras and then getting up towards Belize City and then weakening over the Yucatan Peninsula. And after that, then the track does still look to shift towards Florida. So that has not changed. We are still expecting, again, movement over Central America and then into the Gulf and out towards the state of Florida. These are the latest GFS ensembles. But you'll notice what's different today than yesterday is that intensity metric. All of these ensemble members keep this basically a tropical storm strength. Some of them don't even really redevelop it into a tropical storm, and it's more of just a mess, if you will, that moves into Florida within 7 to 10 days. Now, that's the GFS ensembles. Let's take a look at the European ensembles as well. And you'll notice on the European, a couple members that are stronger, but still, the overall trend overnight has been a weaker system for the state of Florida. Which obviously is good news. You know, we were done with hurricanes for the year. I can tell you that we were over it, a month or two ago. We're definitely over it now as we're approaching the holiday season. But still something that we need to watch because, again, should we get some of these northern members that don't really skirt the coast of Honduras that much, that would leave an open window for intensification just off the coast of the Yucatan, and then would leave less time over the Yucatan so it could maintain that intensity. And then try to, maintain it into the Gulf of Mexico. So we'll need to watch it for sure still. And we'll take a look at a couple of models here just to show you still kind of the overall expectation with the storm system. And we will start with the GFS model. This is this afternoon. Again, still a tropical system, whether that's a depression or storm. We'll see how it evolves throughout the day. But I still think it'll probably get to tropical storm status sometime today or, into the weekend at the latest. But here we go. You'll notice on the GFS again stays just north of Honduras for the next day or two, and because of that, does strengthen to a little bit below 1,000 millibars. But then after that, kind of meanders overland, gets ripped apart, and by the time we're getting into this coming Monday afternoon, you're wondering, well, where is the storm? And what's left of the storm at that point would be somewhere here over the Yucatan, trying to get back into the Gulf, and does do so on the GFS, and then gets pulled back up towards the state of Florida, and you'll notice begins to re-strengthen. Now, at this point, though, this very likely would not be a tropical storm. It would be an extra or post-tropical storm, and I can tell just looking at it because we have this elongated low pressure telling me that we kind of have some fronts building with the storm, and that would make sense because here is our big trough of cold air next week. You'll notice this big dumping of kind of these blue isobars back here. That's picking up the storm and kind of merging their energy together, so it becomes much less tropical and becomes just more of a rainstorm over the state of Florida sometime during the middle of next week, maybe 7 or so days from now. And then behind it could potentially be that big pattern change. Now, the European, very similar story over the near term. Again, gets to a sub 1,000 millibars at some point, probably today, tomorrow, maybe even this weekend. But then meanders near or overland. That helps to weaken it and then gets ripped apart by the Yucatan. Same story as the GFS. We get to next Monday, Tuesday. You're wondering, well, where's the storm? Again, kind of got ripped apart here, but does eventually get picked up here by that trough at a bit of a later time and a little bit further north here, as the European is much less progressive with our pattern change and does still bring a rainstorm into Florida. But again, you're noticing we're not even seeing a close low at that point. So I do still think we are going to see impacts in the southeast, specifically the state of Florida in the rainfall department here. But how much rain, where that rain falls is still a question. And there is still an outside shot that this does re-strengthen into a tropical storm, potentially even a hurricane. Cannot rule that out by any means, but the trends overnight, again, have been good for us in the United States. All right, so rainfall totals here. This is now through next Thursday or Friday on the European and its ensemble members. And you'll notice most of the rain actually on this model kind of is into North Florida and into the southeast over this time frame. And even if I move it further ahead into time, you'll notice those rainfall totals even picking up further. So, not a huge signal for flash flooding on the European, but, 3 to 5 inches of rain in spots, that could be enough to cause problems. And then we take a look at the GFS. And it's really kind of more of the same here with, some of those rainfall totals getting higher up there, but not a huge signal for rain. And some of this is already going to fall today. Not all of this is from that tropical system. Again, but all of this into the Gulf is. So we'll see. We'll keep you up to date. Again, the storm's going to meander near and around Central America for a couple of days. So we'll have time to watch it, see what it does, see if it trends one way or another. And then we will go accordingly from there. But definitely good trends overnight for the United States. All right, time for your Meteorology in Minutes segment, and today we're going to talk about stacked lows and kind of what that means. So again, we've been talking about our troughing pattern recently. This meridional flow is another way to word it, and if you've been watching the past couple days, you'll be able to pick this trough out pretty well. Here you go. It's this big kind of dumping here of cold air, or this elongation of these isobars or height values that are moving downward. Now, what I want you to notice today, though, is where we have our closed height values. So this is the center of the trough. This is the coldest air where we have this closed line. And generally, to strengthen a low pressure, what you want is our center of the low at the surface to be in this section of the trough. This is the diverging side. This is where those height values kind of spread apart. And again, we've been talking about how that creates rising motion. That's what you would want. But notice what we have today at the surface. We actually have our surface low pressure under that closed low. So that means that this is a stacked low. The low at the surface and the low at 500 millibars, or the lowest height at 500 millibars, are over the same area. And that means that the storm is done strengthening. And that is something that we are seeing today, or at least a pattern that is not conducive for any more strengthening. And the reason for that is, again, all of that rising air, all of that divergence aloft is displaced over the east. So what's happening above this low pressure is actually almost some converging wind. So that's going to create the low to kind of fill in, as we say, and begin to weaken over the next couple of days. Now, I'll move the map ahead, and this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler alert, and you're wondering, well, Gerald, the low strengthens right here. What are you talking about? Well, this is what we call phasing. And what happens is the piece of energy from this low is actually going to get brought where we have that divergence. Again, if I go back to the upper level wind map here, down here into the southeast, like I just circled, this is where we have diverging air. What we also have is what we call a baroclinic zone along the east coast, and this is going to be very important for our pattern change that's upcoming, so pay attention here. This is just a zone of very sharp temperature gradients. So again, very cold over the east today due to this cold air damming. At the same time, we have the Gulf Stream here. We have the Atlantic that is still very warm, so that creates a sharp gradient of very tight isobars and very tight temperatures, and you get a little bit of divergence above that. That creates that rising motion, and due to Coriolis, we begin to see spin, and that spin begins to strengthen very quickly due to that sharp gradient. And that's exactly what's going to happen over the next couple of days. You'll notice that low pressure off the east coast strengthening quickly and moving on out of here. So that's your Meteorology in Minutes segment, and I think a pretty good one, some stuff we haven't talked about yet, so hopefully you found that interesting. All right, so what are we seeing out there right now? Well, again, a bit of a mess so far for your Thursday. A whole lot of rain falling from the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes all the way down into the southeast. And I'll mention we are also seeing a little bit of ice here falling into the highest terrains of West Virginia and Virginia. You'll be able to see there's a little bit of beige here. These are special weather statements for some of that ice that is falling. And will be a concern. So if you happen to live up in that area, definitely let me know what you're seeing. Would love to get some of those reports. But again, it's going to be a raw day across the east as the storm moves through. Out west, another storm system moving through. This is once again going to kind of cross the country here and bring active weather into the near and medium term. So speaking of the west, we are going to start out there this afternoon. Again, it's going to be a convective kind of setup here with plenty of snow squalls and rain showers kind of working on through much of the afternoon through the PNW and even into the northern Rockies here. And that will continue through your overnight tonight into tomorrow. And you'll notice defined low pressure beginning to form here. Well, I don't know why I drew that as a highlighter, but you get the point. Defined low pressure beginning to form by your Friday morning, and that will continue through the afternoon Friday, bringing pretty good snow through the mountains of the Sierra Nevadas into Nevada itself, and then into the northern Rockies and even the central Rockies as far south as Utah. Going to see some pretty good snow out of this through your Friday and into the overnight. And you'll notice this low pressure begins to eject across the plains and will likely eventually ride up into Canada, but could bring some snow into the Dakotas and through Minnesota, even through kind of the early part of this coming week. And more importantly, what it's going to do is begin to drag down that pattern change and bring that cold air that will create quite an active scene next week. All right, what's going on in the east? Well, we actually do have a severe weather threat today. We have a small tornado threat for coastal North Carolina here from the Outer Banks all the way back down to Wilmington, Southport, and I would even include kind of the Myrtle Beach area in this. So anyone kind of in this circled area needs to at least have a way to get watches and warnings should something spin up. The overall setup today is kind of a classic Carolina tornado setup. We have very little instability, and you'll know that when you walk outside today. If you live in this area, you're going to say, Gerald, it's 60 outside and raining. How are we going to get a tornado? Well, we have a ton of spin in the atmosphere due to this low pressure that we're watching. And all of that spin combined with just a little bit of lift would be more than enough to produce a couple tornadoes into coastal areas of the Carolinas, specifically North Carolina. But again, even down into northern South Carolina could see that as well. So we will need to monitor that and keep an eye on it. And these are also one of those setups that unfortunately are just tough to detect on radar when a tornado does happen. So, just kind of be on your A game, I guess, if you will, and maybe just, keep an eye to the sky. All right, so this afternoon, again, all this rain, all this mess continues to work east. Again, a raw, cold day. I don't have temperatures pulled up here, but it's going to be in the 40s for many of us as this rain happens. Again, some ice continuing into the higher terrains of West Virginia before eventually that does change over to rain sometime this afternoon. And this whole kind of mess continues to work east. Now, we're not going to get really much out of this into New England. This is really going to be a mid-Atlantic and southeastern event. And you'll notice by this evening, this is about 8 o'clock, this is when that tornado threat could pick up here into the PD of South Carolina up through coastal North Carolina. Again, a lot of spin in the atmosphere and very low LCL heights, just meaning the base of the cloud is very low. So it would not take much to get a little bit of spin to kind of get pulled down from that base of the cloud. And again, we could see a couple tornadoes. So need to watch for that. But other than that, just a cold, chilly, fall-like day with very rainy conditions through the mid-Atlantic and through elsewhere in the southeast. Now, eventually, we'll get into overnight tonight. Again, the storm will move offshore, strengthening quickly. So maybe some pretty breezy conditions even into the Outer Banks of North Carolina tonight. Maybe even some higher winds into the mountains of North Carolina on the northwestern facing slopes as all this wind crosses the mountains to kind of feed into this low pressure. Need to watch for that as well. And by the time we're waking up tomorrow morning, nicer conditions for many of us. Again, clearing out, some showers moving through Florida at that point. But overall, much nicer day for your Friday outside of some showers and maybe even some freezing rain or sleet that tries to work on through New England. And that'll be our next topic here that we discuss. All right, so speaking of that topic, here we go. This is kind of for the near term. We are going to see a storm system out of the Atlantic get pulled back towards the United States, and this will bring some ice, especially up into maritime Canada, up through Labrador, Newfoundland, and into even portions of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. You'll notice this is tomorrow morning. And some of the models say that there's going to be more precipitation than others. That'll be the big question. But should we get heavy enough precipitation, we could see some icing here and anywhere from Maine up into eastern Canada here. And you'll see, again, this is tomorrow morning. We'll get this into tomorrow afternoon. Notice this pink showing up into these areas. That's definitely going to be some freezing rain. The worst of it up here into eastern Canada, up into the maritime region, into, I believe, I read the comments, so I should remember this. I think they said this was considered Labrador in Canada. Again, I promise I read your comment. I just have forgotten, so I'll check again. But again, these portions of Canada could see a lot of ice and even some snow breaking out here. This gets us into Saturday morning and into Saturday afternoon. You'll notice some of that continuing to linger. So total ice accretion could be enough to cause problems, maybe 10 to 20 millimeters of ice up here into the northeastern section of Canada here, but even back down into Newfoundland, especially the kind of western portion of the island here could see enough ice accretion to cause problems. A glaze to 10 millimeters of ice up into Maine, potentially a glaze to 5/100ths of an inch of ice. Worst case scenario, a 1/10 of an inch of ice in spots. Same story out here through New Brunswick and into portions of Nova Scotia. So kind of a sneaky little setup there that might surprise some people. So definitely make sure that you are watching out for that. All right. Well, what's next, folks? Well, this is the fun part. This is the pattern change that we've been talking about and waiting for. And I do think we are going to get some very impressive snowfall totals out of this pattern change for some folks. Now, who that is, that's the big question. But here's the overall setup. This is the GFS ensembles, and you'll notice already by the time we get into early next week, this is Tuesday evening, we have this big pocket of blue that is beginning to work on through portions of the country, and this will be the start of that pattern change. And you'll notice on the GFS, this really amplifies and progresses pretty well. And what I mean by that is it doesn't get stuck in the west. It kind of moves south and then crosses the country as a whole. Again, not getting really stuck in any singular place. And we have this big blob of blue or a big blob of lower height values, colder air that kind of gets put into the United States. And at that point, then we have blocking above it and then it may get stuck a little bit into the east, and we could see this pattern of cooler, stormy weather for a while through the eastern part of the country, maybe all the way into Thanksgiving. So that'll be a big time story here. Now, you're wondering, well, again, you could show me exciting blue maps all the time, but what does this mean at the surface? What's going to happen? Well, I think it all starts early next week. So, we talked about the next 48 hours or so. Here's that storm in the west. I'll mention, by the way, this is the one I said could bring some snow to the Dakotas. You'll notice here, this is the latest GFS, a quick band of snow on the backside of that working on through North and South Dakota. This would be Saturday evening. And then that kind of swings on through. And after that, this is when things begin to get a little exciting. So our trough begins to slowly dump down out into the west. And this is enough to create some low pressure down into portions of the desert Southwest, the Four Corners region. And I am expecting a storm system to form in that area sometime late this weekend into early next week. This is overnight Sunday into Monday morning. You'll notice pretty strong low pressure developing here, and with that, a lot of rain, maybe some severe weather Monday into the southern plains. We'll need to watch for that. But eventually, that storm system pulls north, pulls up through the Great Plains, and then this is when I think we get our first big chance of snow. At this point, our cold air is beginning to rush in, following behind this storm, and either this storm, the one that developed, or potentially another one that could develop again on the diverging side of this trough, could bring big snow. And here's how. Again, you'll notice all of this snow on the backside of this low overlapping that cold air. This is during kind of the middle of next week. You'll notice this would bring big time heavy snow totals somewhere. And on the GFS here, again, also helps to advect our cold air mass towards the east. So this is next Wednesday evening, really overnight Wednesday. Again, notice the blue lines here. This is kind of our rain snow line, if you will. At least it basically means you have a 50-50 shot of what precipitation is falling, being snow or rain, if you are in this blue line. Now, the colder it gets on the blue lines, the lower the numbers, the higher the chance of snow. But you'll notice, again, on the GFS, this is about a week from now, all of that cold air really rushing east pretty quickly. We've got heavy snow falling into the Midwest. And what's happening is on this diverging side, we get more precipitation to fire through the east. Now, that would be rain. But eventually what would happen is this, all this Arctic air would move east, and we would see a major lake effect snow event and northwest flow snow event with a setup like this. Very strong low pressure moving up into Canada, again, along this very big air mass gradient here, or temperature gradient. That would be very windy conditions, be very snowy conditions into portions of Canada, very snowy conditions from lake effect snow into the United States. And then obviously also that would bring potentially some northwest flow snow as far south as the Smokies and up into the Virginias. Now, at this point, the models diverge a good bit, but you'll notice on the GFS that hangs around for a while. We get days and days and days of lake effect snow and cold air through the region. And then what we'll have to watch for, again, we have a very strong baroclinic zone. This is what I talked about earlier. This is a zone of favorable cyclogenesis, so a place that low pressure likes to form. And this would be a great setup for it to happen. The question just would be, does it happen? But should it happen, could we get low pressure to develop down here and right up the coast? Then we could see a more significant winter storm for areas outside of lake effect snow regions and outside of northwest flow snow regions, potentially somewhere into the East Coast. Now, is that my forecast? No, but it is a distinct possibility that we need to watch for, and climatologically speaking, is something that could happen. All right, that was the GFS. What about the Euro? Well, same story. We get this big low pressure and storm system to develop early this coming week. That brings heavy snow into the northern plains. But what the Euro does is develops a secondary low at the same time. And notice what happens here on the Euro. Again, we get that first storm. That one dies off. Then another storm develops. Again, both of these with severe weather potential. But this brings heavy snow much further south towards Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska compared to the GFS, which was more up into Minnesota and the Dakotas. Now, one big difference also between the European is the progression of this trough. You'll notice by the time we get to next Wednesday and Thursday, at this point, the GFS had that kind of cold air mass all the way over the central eastern part of the country. The European is slower with it, but again, still bringing heavy snow to the plains here, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, even portions of Missouri here within about 7 to 10 days, and then finally pulls that cold air east in more of the 10 to 15 day time frame, and then at that point kind of cranks up the lake effect snow machine, and then we would have to watch for this bear clinic zone later on into time. So different timing on the models, different locations on who gets the worst of the snow. But either way, both show a big cool down with major winter storms just in different places and at different times. Now, I did want to mention severe weather, again, is going to be a potential here. This is Monday afternoon. You'll notice a flare-up of ingredients for severe weather down into the plains. And then should the European be correct, we would see another flare-up after that with that secondary storm system. So it's one of those things we'll know more of as we get closer at a time. But right now, also monitoring that severe weather threat. All right, so what is the chance of you seeing snow at your location? These are the GFS ensembles put all together and given a probability of at least an inch of snow falling within a 24-hour time period. So we'll start this early next week. You'll notice heavy snow chances this weekend. I guess we'll start here into the Rockies and again, even up into the Dakotas potentially. Then snowfall chances increase through the Rockies and into the plains early and the middle of next week. Again, this is the GFS. You'll notice a big area here of snowfall potential. Where that low pressure is, how strong it is, obviously will play a big role. But you'll notice a bullseye kind of here over the Dakotas and Minnesota, running about a 40% chance of at least an inch of snow falling. Then after that, later next week, the GFS really cranks up lake effect snow chances and even northwest flow snow chances down into the Appalachia chain from North Carolina all the way up into the Northeast here, and hangs on to those chances for a while as this pattern kind of locks into place. Now, that was a chance of at least an inch of snow falling. What about the chance of maybe more than 4 inches of snow falling? And there is the chance of that in places on the GFS. Again, you'll notice one big flare-up during the middle part of next week into the northern plains, and then another big flare-up into our lake effect regions later next week with the chance of heavy snowfall that could impact travel. And then again, that kind of lingers on for a while into the 10-day range as that pattern kind of locks into place. What about the European model? What's the chance of seeing at least 4 inches of snow on this one? Well, again, there is a small chance, actually, I won't even say small chance. There's a pretty good chance showing up on the model in the plains, but you'll notice a different location. This kind of drags all the way down into New Mexico, Texas, and then all the way up into the Dakotas and Minnesota. So a big range here on the European ensembles for potential, kind of winter storm conditions. And then, again, kind of slower with that cold air pattern, and the European less excited about heavy lake effect snow. And all of that is just due to the timing differences. Again, the GFS is much more progressive with the trough. The European is a good bit slower. So we'll see which one plays out. We'll see if the models kind of can come together here. But one thing I am confident in is cold air on the way. Again, a cold day today in the mid-Atlantic, stays that way through the weekend really, but then warms up significantly during the early part of next week in the east, cools down out west, and then this is the start of that big pattern change. Here's all of that cold air throughout next week, slowly working eastbound. By the time we get to 7 to 10 days from now, really much of the country has below average temperatures. So again, the details on who's going to see the heavy snow is still up in the air, but I do think it's going to happen for someone. I do expect a big pattern change in the temperature department, and I expect kind of all of those things to occur. Alrighty, folks, with that said, y'all have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all tomorrow.